Hello and welcome to Skeleton Songs, the long-risen zombie podcast.
Skeleton Songs, the next chapter, make a CRPG with us, brackets, unfiltered edition.
.mp4. Just like MP4? Mr. Robot, except
I don't know this audio
rubbish.
Stuff.
No, it's probably going to be a WAV.
So, what Skeleton Songs are you, Evan?
Well, Skeleton Songs is an amorphous thing that allows us to put our voices in people's heads. What it used to be is
like that thing I do with my spinal cord.
Yeah, but only,
I used to
only in private. Yeah. Very unsexy Salome dance.
Ew. Right. Well done.
What Skeleton Songs used to be was, for the first three series, a games and literature podcast, because one of the things that we do, Weather Factory, is quite literary games. That's our a unique thing. So we thought we'd talk about all the books that have inspired all the games we make and talk a bit about that. And then basically we got bored of it and we got busy, and so then we moved to do a different thing, which was a YouTube series called Weather Forecast, where we tried to predict what games would do in their first week of launch on Steam, which I really enjoyed but took a hell of a lot of work, so we also gave up on that after a while.
I think the specific reason we did that was because you would do the closed captioning yourself, because we couldn't use the automated options, didn't work because you said such weird stuff, and because I mumble, I know.
No, it's because we're British.
And
the reason that I spent about 3 hours minimum doing subtitling on our kind of hour-long videos is because I swear to God, the auto-subtitling every episode implied that we said something really rude about Jews every time, and I was like, I cannot let a video go out that suggests that we say something rude about Jews, because A, we never do, we love Jews, and B, they just can't cope with our British accent. We'd say something like, hey, do you want to choose what we talk about next? And it'd be like, the Jews again, classic Jews.
Don't say we love Jews though, because you're going to get sampled out of context and you'll sound odd.
The point was just, we didn't say anything controversial, but the auto-subtitling was a liability. So that took a lot of time to edit to make sure we basically didn't get sued by anybody. And we thought we'd come back to this podcast because we are working on a CRPG called Travelling at Night, which is frankly bonkers because CRPGs are famously complicated games to make. They're definitely at the upper end of the complexity of game dev, and there are only 2 of us in Weather Factory, so obviously that's a silly thing to do. However, we have lots of reasons that we think are good for doing it, but we thought people who weren't in game dev might be interested in what it's like actually developing a bonkers game that you shouldn't be able to make.
And I know from the emails I get that people are ravenous for news of what's actually going on inside the Skeleton Songs black box, because we announced it just under a year ago, and people are keen.
And that's the game.
And that's the game, yes.
Do you want to talk about the game for anybody who's listening who has no idea who we are or what the game is?
It's called Travelling at Night, and it's about Spencer Hobson, priest, physician,
Dreamweaver,
stage magician, a failed writer, the dream. He was eaten by worms, devoured from within. He went away, he got better, he came back. There's still a gap in him, and he is trying to fill that gap on a kind of pilgrimage through a wondrous but dying Europe beneath a different sun. And there'll be lots of words in it. I don't think I can get away with less than 500,000, which still, I think that's sort of 10 months sitting down and writing my arse off. Might be a bit longer.
It's a
might get bigger, but it's just CRPGs. It turns out are a shitload of work, and partly it's because they've got to have a lot of content.
Turns out we shouldn't be making one. It's a stupid idea.
Well, we should. I still think it was a really good idea. I'm still glad we're doing it. I'm still really enjoying it. And one of the things is it's just got a lot of words in. Another thing is it comes with a lot of really specific expectations, and if we don't fulfil those expectations, it looks like there's a gap. So it's the first game we've ever made that's actually in a genre.
I was gonna give so I think this is really significant. So we're not just idiots. I mean, sometimes we might be, but in this instance we actually have reasons for what we're doing. So the reason we have chosen to make this impossible CRPG is because we think that our strength as a studio is our writing. AK, who is sitting next to me and is not me, so I can be polite about writing, is our writer, and he's really good. So we want to foreground writing. Now, traditionally, Weather Factory games and your games in the past, your previous studio, so Fallen London, Sunless Sea, etc., are kind of known for really brilliant writing, but often quite obscure mechanics. So it means that a certain type of player bloody loves it because it really tests their brain and they feel very rewarded when they figure it out. But other types of players think, I'd love to read the writing, I'd love to see the stories that you've written because you're great at it, but I feel sort of obfuscated by the actual game design. So the reason that we've chosen to do travelling as a CRPG is because for the first time we want to take a genre, rather than doing something totally innovative and weird and new, we want to take a genre that is understood, and then we want to do something really interesting with that genre. So we're not just going to make a basic thing, we're going to do something interesting, but with a set of expectations that people understand. So, for example, our last game, Book of Hours, I'm the marketing side of this duo. So
I'm so sorry.
Bloody hell, how do you market Book of Hours? Actually, people listening to this, there's a high probability that you have either heard of or played Book of Hours. It's currently on a daily deal on Steam, so haha, marketing. But I would be genuinely interested in how you would suggest that we market it, because, what is it? Well, it's kind of a card game, but it's not. It's a narrative game, but it isn't. It's an RPG, but you've never seen one like it before. It takes place in a library where you can move everything, and it's important that sometimes you have people over for tea, but most of the time you're kind of uncovering basically arcane secrets, but in kind of a nice way. And then there's a bit with a lighthouse. How do you put that in a Reddit ad? How do you say in one sentence to a TikToker, this is why you should play my game? And most of all, when we're on sale on Steam, I'm sure people listening to this play PC games, and Steam is usually the main go-to for PC games. When you're on sale, on a seasonal sale, Steam's like, great, where should I put you? And you're like, oh, Steam, I haven't got an answer to that. And Steam's like, well, I want to help you, but you're going to go at the back with all the weirdos. So we're trying, as an experiment with Travelling at Night, to do something where everybody understands what we're starting from, which is it's a character-driven, isometric RPG inspired by the sorts of games like Planescape Torment, Shadowrun Returns, and Disco Elysium. Those are some really clear kind of sticks in the mud. Now we're going to do stuff, we hope, that is quite distinct from all of those. And hopefully you've never seen anything like it before, and I think we're on track for that. But the point is that there is some sort of starting point of understanding, so we don't have to be like, wait, come back, to anybody who has no idea what we're doing.
So I've two things to say, one of which is trivial, one of which is going to sound like I'm high. The trivial thing is...
I can confirm he's not.
He's
not into substances.
I'm really not. I'm so vanilla. The first, my favourite current nerd-in joke is the fact that Reddit has reacted to the announcement of the incoming Steam machine, just to mention Steam, by christening it the Gabe Cube.
We love Gabe. We all love Gabe.
He played Cultist Simulator.
He did.
I did. I mailed him and I asked if it was true because he said he did an interview and he said yes, his son told him to.
Literally our proudest moment as a studio.
And the more... Okay, so in, I think, Hackney... there is. We live in London, although we often wish we didn't. And Hackney is in North London.
Well, you've chosen one of the friendliest parts of London to mention.
I don't know. Maybe it's Chingford. It's somewhere in sort of. Not. I think it's not important.
So
right.
Not
somewhere
important.
in the farther outbits of North East London, there is this smouldering heap of rubbish, and it's been burning for years.
Is this a metaphor?
And they call it something like the Inferno or the Underflames. And people say their children got ill from living near it, and it's not visibly burning, but it keeps on smouldering. And I mention this because there's a thread on our discussion forums on Steam for Book of Hours where people have been arguing about whether or not it is a card game for approximately 2 years, and I keep on wanting to lock it. Because obviously the tone is a bit grumpy, and it got started by somebody who was like, "What the shit is this shit? I can't even this shit."
Well, see, this might be,
but it's actually thrown up to a really interesting conversation about ludic philosophy and taxonomies and things. So I've not shut it down. I think the last post when I asked it was somebody saying, "I just read through all of this and it was really interesting." Thanks, guys.
No, you see this. We should know better, really, because I do think that the genre first thing is a really good starting point. However, I have forgotten my trial by fire with Cultist Simulator, which we once described as a roguelike, and we still do, and that was a learning experience. It turns out that I think particularly roguelikes have a passionate user base who feel very strongly about what does and does not.
We're talking about the Berlin Consensus.
I have learned about the Berlin Consensus. roguelikes are really something else, and they were not convinced that Cultist Simulator was a roguelike. And I think that's fair. It's a very weird roguelike, hence roguelite, which is the sort of other term. But I happily tag it as both and just let God sort them out. So maybe we will find another similar passionate user base in CRPGs who will say, well, Travelling at Night is technically an isometric character-driven RPG, but it doesn't have this feature in it. So we'll see. It's all a hideous learning experience, really, isn't it? That's our job.
So we've talked about basically 3 inspirations, one of which almost no one's heard of. We've talked about
Shadowrun.
Yeah.
But it seems the nichest, absolutely, of the 3 that we constantly talk about. But I think people are most excited to hear it, partly because it's niche, and they think, ooh, this is something that I know about that someone else is saying and no one else talks about this. But partly because it really inspires something in people. And I can see why. It really does have a sort of an interesting soul, unlike Disco and Planescape, who are soulless, which, to be clear, is a joke. They're both totally brilliant.
So just to run back over that ground and mark it out with Scarlet Ribbon, we've talked about, I mean, there's a lot of isometric CRPGs with good stories out there, but the particular foci, or loci, or bloci have been Disco Elysium,
I like bloci.
Planescape Torment, and Shadowrun. And Shadowrun is much less well known than either of those two. It's a reinvention of an innovative TRPG from the 90s that you've either heard of and love or have never heard of and is out of date. Planescape Torment is the sort of Fonset Origo of all intelligent.
The phrase I always hear about is, have you heard of our Lord and Saviour Planescape Torment?
There we go. Yeah.
This is considered sort of the height of weird literary CRPGs, certainly before Disco came along, and still to date possibly considered the apex.
And the thing is about Disco, I kind of wish we'd never mentioned it. We've resisted calling it a Disco-like because
we'll come back to this.
There has been such a crop of successors, and we're not a goddamned successor studio. We have no connection with the Disco guys. We don't want to claim and can't claim any part of that. We both love Disco, really fine game, well written, mold breaking.
But we're not trying to copy it.
We're not going to copy. The biggest contribution that Disco made was simply that it really feels like a CRPG. You'll get people who say it's more on point and click, but it does feel like a CRPG.
It does.
And it doesn't have any flipping combat. And we were like, wow, you're allowed to do that. I guess we could do that. So it's a single, not the only, but the single biggest contribution. And just spiritually or tonally, we're not like it. We're not very like Shadowrun either, spiritually or tonally.
No, but this is why I talk about Shadowrun Soul. I think Shadowrun is the closest to us because I think they are probably the smallest studio with the least resources over time. I know Disco started with no resources, but by the end of it, they had quite a lot of steam. But Shadowrun do a hell of a lot with a little, and that's something I'm very proud of with this studio. That, you know, we can't compete with Blizzard and Ubisoft and Bethesda because we just don't have the money or resources or skill set to make everything totally polished all the time. But what we do is do stuff that people can't get elsewhere with all of our soul put into it. And there is something about Shadowrun that feels like that. And I'm not saying this is not a euphemism for me saying it's actually a bit kind of janky, but like we love it anyway. Like, no, like open it up, and within the first 5 minutes you'll get this sense of like there's presence, and I want to be here, and it's interesting, and it is by far the cheapest of all of those 3 games. So I think there's a really good comparison to what we're trying to do.
I think it's true, and you know what else it's got?
Dragons.
The conversation interface on the right hand side.
So this is right, just to give you the potted history of why we're a little bit wary of comparing ourselves to Disco Elysium.
But being compared by other people to Disco Elysium.
Which is totally inevitable. So just to be clear, that's going to happen. And semantics be damned. We totally rushed to announce Travelling at Night last year, almost exactly a year ago, because for an indie studio, it's very important to start talking early and often about your game because you need time to kind of basically accrete stuff, like, you know, silt around a crumb in a oyster and eventually get a pearl. And if you don't give it long enough, then you don't get a pearl, you just get a sandy oyster. So we rushed to get Travelling at Night launched on Steam with a Steam page and announced it as soon as possible. Now, this was before a massive sudden glut of a million different people saying that they were making a bunch of specifically Disco Elysium inspired games. Now, a lot of those people had direct connections to the studio, so a bunch of the kind of top brass are off doing their own thing together. There's a bunch of other splinter developers who were involved on Disco who are now doing their own thing on a various amount of different studios. And what this has resulted in is quite a sort of tussle of who is claiming authenticity and who who is saying, I'm going to be this true successor for Disco Elysium and yada, yada, yada. And we're not involved in any of that. We just sort of naively said, oh, we really like Disco and it hasn't got any combat and it's an isometric CRPG. So we want to acknowledge the inspiration here, which is basically we want to write a really brilliant story, with actually brilliant words in it, like Disco did. And that's kind of it. And then it turns out that actually it's a big conversation, and we certainly don't want anybody to think that we are saying that we are, either the successor to Disco or have any connection to them, which we don't. So that's one thing. But the other thing that we weren't expecting is everybody who really passionately cares about Disco Elysium and the studios that succeeded all seem to think that Disco were the first game to use a particular UI, which is basically have a linear vertical bit of text in a UI window. Now, a lot of older CRPGs have the text at the bottom of the window in the centre, but if you are reading a lot, it's actually much more comfortable for user experience to read it from top to bottom in a sort of, Kindle-like format. And so we got a bit of flack when we announced, because a lot of people said, oh, you just copied Disco Elysium's UI and it's just a vertical sidebar and, you're lazy devs. And actually, Shadowrun predates that by 10 years.
And I think the other...
so we're copying them.
Kind of circular life thing is just that... Disco made use of a really fine Unity asset store offering called the dialogue system. So if you're not a game developer, Unity is, as you probably know, one of the development tools people use. One of Unity's selling points is the Unity asset store. There's lots of plug-in, drop-in, easy to use tools available for free or for a few squids, which is English dollars. Through the Unity asset store, and the dialogue system Disco used. We're also using. It's kind of an industry standard, I guess, for sort of indie games with dialogue. And I noticed the dialogue system's actually folded back into their offerings. The right hand side style of dialogue, because it's clearly been very popular. Disco, I know, was specifically trying to emulate a film spool, and I think a lot of great innovations in design come out of attempts to do something different and then have sort of serendipitous outcomes. Again, I'm going to sound like I'm high, but bear with me.
You need to stop saying that.
There's a reproductive biologist, the late Jack Cohen, who years ago I attended a talk of his in which he asserted, I think this is true, he's a reproductive biologist and I'm not, so I believe him.
I'm sorry, I don't know what a reproductive biologist... Do you mean a biologist who has a romantic relationship with a woman?
A biologist who studies the means by which life makes more life.
Well, all of it? Whales, spiders, squirrels...
amoebas, whale spiders...
broad.
Fox spirits...
Okay, sorry, never say whale spiders again.
Potato plants... but he used to go to science fiction cons and talk about sort of speculative xeno-evolution, which is how he swam into my ambit. And he said that it so happened that we evolved from some branch of the fish genus, and these fish had their reproductive organs near their organs of waste elimination. And it might have been that we'd evolved from a completely different fish that kept its reproductive organs on its head.
This was the first date, was it?
Waste elimination organs elsewhere. And if he suggested that, if that has happened, we'd have a totally different attitude to sex. It wouldn't be a taboo thing. We'd just be sort of wandering around going, oh, hello, I'm doing a sex. And I think a lot of how things turned out is just how it happened to happen at the time. I wrote an essay about this years ago.
I wasn't going to mention that because I love you, but I do know that you're talking about an essay you wrote.
Oh yeah, reduce, reuse, recycle. But the thing is, a lot of stuff just happens in game design, whether it's TRPGs, CRPGs, games generally, and then sticks. So the fact that we have 6 stats in D&D and in all the games that sort of descended from D&D, like we're descended from Complicated Fish, is just a result of a couple of nerds sitting down near Lake Geneva in the 1970s.
And making a bunch of arbitrary
and
decisions.
making this decision. Intelligence and wisdom are different stats. Okay, now everyone thinks of intelligence and wisdom as different stats forever. Charisma was a stat, and comeliness wasn't a stat until second edition or Unearth the Gone or whatever it was. So again, that's a sort of basic assumption. The idea of levels and levelling up and XP again all came out of this. Now, some of this is good design or lasting design or attractive and has stuck, and some of it is just it's happened to happen. I think one of these things is the conversation window along the bottom of the screen, which when you think about it is nuts. Conversation is easier to read in a column, and words are important in a CRPG. But just because very early,
I can see how it happened though, because I imagine it was, we need a heads-up display, a HUD, and so we're going to put all the icons in the row at the bottom because the bottom bit of the screen tends to be the least important. And then somebody says, "Oh, we need a conversation," but it's an early game, so there isn't that much text. And they think, "Oh, we'll just put it at the bottom," and then you get this inheritance thing, and that's where it goes. All the information goes to the bottom.
And
of
that's
the screen.
it. And it's clearly not an unusable or stupid idea. It's just once you move away from it, you're like, why did we do that for so long?
Well, that I would hope. I really like questioning things. My job in this duo, listeners, is basically to be the idiot. I'm actually very clever, but I'm certainly not a sort of inherited nerd. I didn't have any nerd friends when I was growing up, and I don't know all the stuff about previous nerd stuff that Alexis sort of lives and breathes. I mean, what's your cute story? You started at 7 when you saw some boys at the local pool reading a D&D manual?
I was. There were 2 kids playing D&D in the row in front of me in the viewing gallery in the swimming pool at school, and it's like, hit points? What's that?
It's so sweet. Right, so I don't have any of that, but what I think is useful is to use me as a sort of sieve, as a test. So if AK says, here's some nerd stuff, and it's really exciting, and I go, wow, I get that, then that I think is quite a good test for there is something intrinsic to that nerd stuff that is powerful. But if there is something that is inherited, he might say, oh, it's very important that, wisdom and intelligence are different stats, and I say, why? And then there's a pause. And then we have a discussion about it, and hopefully what that means is that we end up in a healthy, good way, thinking about why things are the way they are, and not always following convention, which is partly what we're trying to do. We're trying to do interesting new stuff that people haven't seen before. So, listeners,
let me share with you an experience. My wife, some time ago, when we were making a CRPG, she said, I finally have to sit down and play Planescape Torment.
I really did.
And she did, and she thoroughly enjoyed it, but there was some friction. And one of the friction was the fact that Planescape Torment is, I think, actual first edition D&D.
I think it's second, actually.
Is it second?
I
can't,
believe
but
it's
it's not older school, then old school.
I have never played anything like it. The assumptions it made. The assumptions.
So I'm sitting, sipping my gin and playing, I don't know, Crusader Kings or something, and I get this sort of warbling plea from across the room. AK, which of these weapons is better? I'm like, I don't know. She says, because it says something about THAC0. What's THAC0?
Yeah, what is THAC0 +1?
To hit AC 0.
Is a question I wish I'd sort of never asked.
And I'm like, oh, well, if you go back to the Dungeon Master's Guide, the first edition, obviously there's a table where you cross-reference armour class with a level, and you get a matrix, and that's too much hassle, so you have to... And I become aware this blankness has entered my wife's visage, and
a bit like when you were talking about fish genitalia.
So this
is the same face.
But this is the thing, there's if you put the word THAC0 in front of somebody who's not encountered it before, then they think they're speaking Latin, or it's some sort of complicated text.
So genuinely, it's an interesting situation, because on the one hand, I really love the fact that game was made for a very specific person. Now, the assumption was that the person playing Planescape Torment was also the person who totally understood what THAC0 was. There was no tutorial, there was no sort of tooltip. It just said, THAC0 +1, do you want it? And I was like, oh, is that good? And it turns out THAC0 Plus is bad, so let's not even get into the madness of THAC0. But I actually love the fact that this game was really made...
test for syphilis.
We are getting into THAC0.
The positive test is worse than the negative test. Positive sounds good, but it's actually bad if it's syphilis.
Right, so I was playing this game which didn't have syphilis in it, and
You didn't test for it.
I was happy that, and I genuinely, I think it's really good and interesting that this game was made for a very specific type of audience, but unfortunately these days everybody's got in on video games and nerd culture, so I think it is actually quite a choice to make a game that is so reliant on existing knowledge that you expect everybody in your audience to understand what Thaco is. Now, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't make those games. I applaud anybody who makes a game for a very specific audience, but I am not that audience, and I found it quite bamboozling, which was a shame because I was really enjoying the rest of the game, and then every so often it would throw me a curveball like that and I'd be like, I don't know what you want from me, Dan. So
I remember it finished, you got really sad. You're like, I can't hang out with Mort anymore.
I know, and Ignis isn't going to say any weird shit to me as I'm like randomly doing my bit, going about my day, and he'll be like, it burns, and you're like, Ignis, do you want to talk? And he's like, yes, let's talk of the flames. He was so great.
Yeah, I tried that for a bit, but it didn't really win me any spouse points.
Yeah, I don't know. Ignis is the best. Mort is obviously great. Mort is quite a how would I put this? A product of his time. He's extremely well written and extremely charming, but he's also like a massive perv. So you got to go in with a bit of leeway for the talking floating skull. But I feel like the talking floating skull deserves a bit of leeway because what's going on there? There's a history. There's an interesting social media account behind that talking floating skull. How do we get to here?
We're making a CRPG.
Oh yeah.
So we've got a demo coming.
Well, allegedly.
Well, but we do. I mean,
no, of course we do. Of course we do. We are hustling. That's currently where the studio is at, and the studio being us too.
Yeah.
We are hustling.
Plus a handful of talented freelancers.
That's very true, which we haven't announced yet, so you're not allowed to say any names in case you were going to say any names, which we will discuss in the future. But yes, so we are hustling towards a demo, which we hope to get out at the end of this month or early next month, which will go out to an incredibly small group of people. It was really wonderful that we put out a thing saying, does anyone want to help us playtest our game? And we got like 1,500 responses in a couple of days.
Yeah.
And the amount of people that we can pick for the first playtest is about 20. Yeah. So quite a lot of those people are going to be a bit disappointed, but we're really grateful, and we will almost certainly ask them to come back as a beta tester.
Yeah, and we are, the idea is that we let a couple of dozen people bang their heads against it and say, this doesn't work, or actually this bit's brilliant, you should do more of it, and then we clean it up, expand it a bit, and then we put it out as a public Steam.
This is a real thing. So my background in game dev, at least, is as a producer, and the producer role is a very varied and I think very interesting one, but also it's almost universally unpopular for everyone else who works with them, because the producer's job is basically to sort of help everybody complete stuff, and often people find that quite stressful. But one of the things about being a producer is you have to sort of get good at the psychology of other people, and one of the universal game dev psychologies is everybody hates launching anything, right? Regardless of what specialism you're in, like you bloody hate a launch because it's incredibly stressful, it's very like risky, and it feels like kind of rolling the dice because there is an element of luck in it. You can do everything right and it can still not quite go to plan, or you can do everything right and Bethesda can launch the new Fallout 5 on the same day that you happen to launch, and then you're buggered. One of the things that I think continually trips up developers, certainly indie developers, is they never want to show their work to anybody who isn't in the studio. They never want to give it to players because it's your baby, it's your creative thing, you want it to be the best it can possibly be. So of course the sort of natural impulse is to hold on to it until it's polished and perfect and then release it. But one of the things about iterative game design is you really want to get early feedback very early on to know that you're on the right track at all.
So
you're very good at this actually because you've run a studio and you're
except
quite practical.
I'm not, but
no, but emotionally you're not. But
yeah.
You know that you need to get over that. But that's exactly my point. That we are going to get this build out as soon as possible. It is going to be extremely janky. It's an alpha, which means that it doesn't have all the features in it that even the basic game is going to have, and it's a tiny slice of location. You can only go through one location basically. But we really want to get it in the hands of people just so they can tell us, I'm actually enjoying this, because we think we're onto something quite special. But until you give it to a player who isn't you can never know.
And one of the lessons of demos is that things people come back with and say, I didn't understand that, or that didn't work for me, are less than half the time what you expected. I spent I'm coming up to 17 years of game development, and I've always tried to put out demos earlier than I'm comfortable with demos, alphas, betas, and it's always been an emotional struggle, and I've often needed to be sort of forced backwards protesting into it. Because, when you think back to your childhood, we had various people listening to this will remember the childhood with various degrees of fondness, but unless you're actually kept in a cage, there are nice things about childhood, and one of them is your future is ahead of you, and your future could be anything, and that's how designers feel about games. When a game's in the future, it could be anything. It could be the best game you've ever done. It could be the best game anyone's ever done. But once it's out there, it's out there. Guillermo del Toro was saying something similar about Frankenstein, which he'd been famously wanted to make for about 25 years. And he said a few years ago he had the Fritz. He was worried about it because once it was out there, it was going to be judged. It would no longer be sort of the project that might or might not be perfect, the dream. It's like being an Olympic gymnast in front of the judges, and they might give you 6.5, and then that's what you got forever. And this is the thing, when your game is still this amorphous, auroral, luminous, numinous possibility, it's exciting and pleasant to work on it. But as soon as you've got a deadline, you have to start to think about what can go in and what can't go in because you haven't got time. And that's basically where we are now. The demo could go out tomorrow if we wanted, but it'd be extremely janky rather than very janky.
And to the point where it wouldn't give us good feedback, as in like useful feedback, to be clear.
So we need to decide the acceptable level of jank, and that again is a lot of game development in a nutshell. You need to decide the acceptable level of inelegance or jank or missing features. And this is more than true of CRPGs than most because they're such complicated beasts.
They really are.
Is such
even
a
if you take the combat out, they are
Even
really
take the combat
complicated.
Out. And because every time you add a branch to a conversation, it implies another 4 branches or another 8 branches of other people's conversations.
Well, and there's nothing like if we're relying entirely on the dialogue and the story, which we are, like Disco did, then there is nothing worse as a player than clicking an option that reflects a choice you didn't make or something, because that breaks the immersion. So I don't mean that sort of thought you got the wrong answer, but I mean if you have an option which infers knowledge that you actually haven't got because you haven't spoken to that person yet, like all these little tiny little hiccups that can happen that are quite effective in a negative way on the player, but are very easy to creep in because you've got to plan this incredibly complicated web of narrative structure, all of which I'm glad to say is your problem, not mine.
I said at the beginning when we first announced this game that it was a lot like if you're a composer, sooner or later you might want to write an opera, and then after that you might regret having made that decision because it's sort of the culmination of the form in some ways, and it drags in a whole bunch of different things from related disciplines. It's a lot of bleeding work, but there's nothing else like it.
Well, I do think you and I are learning a hell of a lot from it. We have the luxury, because we're such a tiny studio and because we're married to each other, that this is a lifestyle as well as a business. So we both love games, we both love what we do. AK does the writing, design and the coding, and I do the art, the production and the marketing. And we're both kind of self-starters, if that doesn't sound too awful, which means that we really enjoy being faced with, you can't do this now, figure out a way to do it and learn how to get good at doing that thing. So that's incredibly rewarding.
Or in my case, very often adequate at doing that thing. Because, I'm a pretty good writer and I'm a decent designer, but I'm not the world's best coder. I never will.
But this is exactly my point, right? Great example that from about a year ago when we announced Travelling at Night, you have come on leaps and bounds in terms of your UI coding because you've been forced to do quite a lot of it because this game doesn't let you cheat, right? CRPGs require a bunch of basic systems to be actually really good, so you have to go through those hoops. So as humans, I think we're really evolving, which is incredibly satisfying and really fun artistically. And
do you think maybe our genitals will move somewhere else?
Okay, I'm not answering that question, certainly not with a microphone in front of me actually, but my point is it's very rewarding, that part of our jobs, but obviously the price is it's quite stressful. Though, ultimately most game dev, and certainly indie game dev, is you do it until either you can't bear to do it anymore or you run out of money and then you launch a demo and then you see what happens. So we're following that classic model, and we'll see how it goes.
As our forefathers and their fathers before them, and their fathers' fathers.
Speaking the truth.
And their fathers' fathers.
So are we talking about what we've done this week, or shall we just end it there with a little introductory episode?
Yeah, I'll be doing... Oh. God, this is a thing. CRPGs, one of the reasons there's so much work is they invite ambition. You think, Can
you just explain to people who aren't designers, like why? Because why is a CRPG so much more work than another genre, than a roguelike or a match 3 or a...
Because a CRPG is a game So it's going to be a game in...
Brilliant. 17 years well spent. It's not jam. CRPG. It's not a duck. It's difficult.
Well, in one sense, it is. No. It's a game. You got to have the little peoples running around on the screen. You've got to have them picking up things, and you might have a combat, and you might have a skill system, and you might
you should have written our Steam page. Yeah. Oh, well, you did.
Only the florid bits. And you've got to all that, and then onto the side of it, you've got to bolt about 5 novels worth of actual content. I mean, literally 5 novels to get started. The really chunky legendary CRPGs are way more than 5 novels. Yeah, a million plus. I don't think we'll get to that. In fairness, that's because I tend to write quite tersely.
That's your
not
thing.
like I speak. So I think that probably be 25% more content than you'd expect from the number of words in it, but still, also there's just me and I'm doing other things, and I can only write so fast. So it's basically a game plus a whole bunch of other stuff, and the other stuff also, it's not just 5 novels, of course, it's 5 interactive novels, and it's 5 novels where effectively the reader is nudging the writer in the ribs every so often and saying, actually, have you thought about a chapter where we go to the circus? Or actually, wouldn't it be interesting if the lead character could get really swole and everything would be different? Or, and this is sort of a mark of quality in a lot of CRPGs, if the lead character is really stupid, there's a whole bunch of different dialogue options just for somebody who's really stupid.
That's very rewarding.
So that's the thing. CRPGs come with a bunch of expectations, all of which are sort of game-sized requirements themselves. Plus, there's got to be a lot of actual narrative, actual words. If you care about the story, and you get CRPGs that aren't really narrative focused, but they're focused much more on the combat, and that itself is that much more complicated.
I think on top of that, there's another thing as well, which is a sort of purity thing. So we've said that the big thing that we're doing with travelling is that it's a CRPG, but there isn't any combat, right? So that's quite an unusual departure. I know Disco really made that clear, that you could succeed without combat, but that's quite a bold thing to have in a CRPG, no combat at all. And I feel like when someone comes over to this house and I cook them dinner, I often go to something like a chili, because one of the great things about chili is you put in a bunch of tasty ingredients and then it tastes good, because it's a mix of different things. Whereas if you go to a super high-end Michelin-starred sushi restaurant, they might be like, I have given you an inch of salmon, and there's that and some white rice, and it's the best thing you've ever tasted, but it's incredibly simple. And I think one of the other challenges of a non-combat CRPG is that everything relies on the writing. It doesn't, it has to be great writing because people have to want to keep reading it, but it also has to be interactive writing. It has to reflect the player's choices. It has to have interesting branching options, and there's no kind of obfuscating it or hiding it with lots of different ingredients, because it really is a lot of reading and clicking through. So I don't want to make you feel anxious, but I think it's a very
you're right. It's fun to say. This is one of the things that made me feel. Well, this brings us back to what I've been doing this week, actually, in a minute. But
drinking heavily and crying.
One of the things that made me feel renewed and excited once I realised it is when we sat down to do a CRPG, we said, look, what we're known as for a studio is the narrative stuff, and let's put that front and centre. And when you stop thinking of the narrative as being something you have to trowel into a million different holes until they're full enough, and then you sort of wipe the grouting off, and then it's a wall, into thinking instead, what we've got is a million chocolates, and what we need to do is deploy those chocolates the most delicious and tempting way.
Gourmet advent calendar.
Then it changes the way you think about creating the content. I think this is the downfall of... No, the downfall is much too strong. I think this is one of the challenges for larger studios that have lots of writers working on one game, is that you quite quickly start to see that the writing has been deployed to fill packages. No more and no less, and it's is difficult practically to get away from that. I think that's one of the reasons. I was approached last year by a large studio that does CRPGs, who I really respect.
They're probably one of the most respected studios for this.
Would you like to come and do some sort of consultancy training thing with us for us? We're trying to bring in experts. And I was really flattered, and I thought about it hard, and I went back and said, actually, no. I think I just don't have the skills that you need for a big operation. I've worked in a couple of big studios, and this has only deepened my sense of that. And I think if I were to come in and tell you how to do things, one, people never listen to consultants anyway. They wait until the presentation's over and then go back to whatever they're doing. But two, I think my advice would be somewhere between useless and damaging. But what I've been doing this week is the flipping crafting system, for which the flipping UI is flipping challenging. And like I say, CRPGs invite ambition. If it's all just text, then you might as well be writing a visual novel. And so you need some system to be wrangling with while you're bodding around the beautifully hand-painted backgrounds. And we don't have combat, so what you've got is a reasonably intricate crafting system, which is sort of like Cultist Simulator Lite. And immediately half the audience will think, Cultist Simulator Lite? What about Cultist Simulator Extra Large with new plutonium flavour? Why are you cutting it down? The other half will be thinking, oh, thank Christ, it's light. I never get my head around all those aspects. But even a sort of cut down version of it has been quite challenging, and fitting the UI in alongside the inventory is just UI always takes 2 to 3 times as long as you think.
It is famously the thing that all game devs hate the most, because it is very rare to have somebody who is a UI coder or designer who is in any position of authority on a game. Like, why would you start with UI? UI tends to be like to serve the game rather than the way around. So what usually happens is the coder or an artist end up being the one who's responsible for the UI, and it kind of looks like it should be something within your purview. If you're a coder, you should be able to set things up appropriately in Unity, and if you're an artist, you should be able to design things that look attractive and work well. But actually it's a totally different set of requirements and skill sets that very few people have, and as you say, it takes a really long time to actually set up properly, but it is literally the way that gamers interface with your game all the time. So you have to make it good, otherwise you can make the best game ever, but if the UI and UX are rubbish, people will end up feeling frustrated.
And it breeds complications. As a tiny example, when you're doing crafting, there are skill tests involved. Crafting always succeeds, but if you fail a skill test, you get a byproduct. You get some dread or some dizzy acquiescence or some pain.
Which means you get to see some beautiful icons.
Yes.
As a treat.
And part of the travelling mechanic is that if you fail a skill test, you get an opportunity to use some resources to pass it. You can top it up. So you've got an interface that appears that says how much of your resources, which resources do you want to spend to pass. Oh, you've given up, fine, we'll put it away. Oh, you've spent the resources to do it, fine, you've passed the skill test. So it's a way of folding some resources back into allowing people to control their experience and how probability works to a limited extent, and minimise the old save scumming. And you can do this with skill when you're crafting. And I just realised halfway through testing that this interface pops up in the same way it pops up in the dialogue window. But unlike the dialogue window, there's other things going on in the background. So somebody can fail a skill test, realise they're going to have to take some pain nightmares, and quietly drag the ingredient items out of the crafting interface back into their inventory before they click accept. So it's an easy fix. You put an opaque, I'm gesturing, overlay over the top of it that pops up with the interface and you stop people interacting with the rest of it, and then you make sure the keyboard shortcuts are shut down and all the rest of it. So it's a really trivial fix, but you get these really trivial fixes all the time. And then one of the natures of coding is that you put a trivial fix in one part and it tends to make some nonsense pop out another part, and the UI is more prone to that than anything. So that's what I was doing. I thought I was ahead of the game this time. Estimated 3.5 days for working on this, and it was 5. So
But all work that needed doing.
all work that needed doing. That's what we keep saying every time we get a couple of days behind.
And this is not our strength as a studio. We're not a UI first UX studio. We are a narrative first studio. That just
As people who've played our games will know.
they'll be cackling into their mugs of mead.
Yeah, all right.
But what we do is interesting stuff that people haven't seen before. And if the price of that is occasionally the UI explodes, we'll try to fix it. But I think that's the price.
And then I spent this afternoon sorting out the background music. So you've got some
gorgeous music.
Some gorgeous music from our unannounced composer, and we got some other royalty-free stuff. 1940s swing, basically.
It's not swing. I'm sorry, it's Django.
Yeah, Django Reinhardt. Now, of course, we know him as the originator of jazz manouche, but at the time it was actually referred to as swing.
Ooh, that's just a smackdown, ladies and gents. Listen to this. I got it.
Well, this was okay.
Apparently wrong. Because swing these days means something very different.
It does. No, you're right. And
I say this as a trombonist and a jazz fan. So
this is so one of the things about flipping to the narrative side. One of the things about writing a game set in 1948 Europe is that 1948 Europe is in some respects, even before our version of 1948 Europe, which is a fictional city in place of Cologne drowned in amber and spider mist getting into people's eyes and making them spew out spiders and all the rest of it. It's very similar to Europe in some ways, but also really, really different. It's 70, 80 years ago. So a lot of attitudes and expectations are different, and also just the situation after the war is fundamentally different. There's a story I was reading up on post-World War Europe, and there was an account of some Polish girls fleeing the oncoming Red Army from Poland, and they hooked up with, not in that sense, some American prisoners of war, I think, as they crossed Germany. And one of the Americans of prisoners of war happened to be a black dude, and which is much more common in the American army than in European armies at the time. And when they were getting food from farmers, apparently what this guy used to do was he'd take his clothes off, he put a knife between his teeth, and he'd go at the farmers rah, 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 and he'd do a kind of pseudo-tribal dance. And he was from, I don't know, Chicago or something. But as far as all these rural German farmers who'd recently been part of a Nazi regime were concerned, this terrifying creature is coming them out of the darkness of their head, according to the account of these girls in Savage Continent, this really good book on post-war Europe, very meticulously researched. Apparently it did. But I can't put that in the game. I can't have a black dude dancing around naked pretending to be a sort of tribal savage.
No, I can see a number of issues with that.
Yeah, so this is the thing. It's not just about...
This is why I'm the marketing arm.
It's not just about whether you put in the old racism or not. It's all about if you take things that actually happened from the time and you put them in front of a modern audience, then sometimes it doesn't land as you expect. And this is one of the... this brings us back to Django Reinhardt. One of the most... talented guitarist ever to grace our continent, despite being A, self-taught, and B, having burnt a number of fingers off in a fire. And Django...
On his left hand as well, which is particularly insane for a guitarist.
As are my guitarist wife, is much better aware than me. But Django was a sort of iconic figure in jazz in Paris. Even under the Nazis, it turned out that... So Django... Key point, he was a gypsy. He was Belgian originally, but I'm not saying Romany because I think he was a clan who don't traditionally identify as Romany. But here we start getting into the terminology thing.
Already, yeah.
If you call somebody a gypsy, in some contexts it's offensive, And the so Django very definitely was not a good area as far as the Nazis were concerned, and they also didn't like jazz because it's degenerate.
Could lead to fun.
It could lead to fun. It's American. It's manufactured in large part by black people. And the Nazis are not a fan
historically.
No. But there were a lot of SS officers who really liked jazz
because it's great.
So Django stayed in business during the Nazi occupation of Paris because he had enthusiasts on the inside who prevented the quintet, the hot club, being shut down. Anyway, the point is, Django's output is generally referred to as jazz manouche, which is, I think, his clan, or gypsy jazz, and this is a bit of controversy now in the jazz community. You get people who call themselves gypsy jazz quintets, but you also get people who don't like using the term because gypsy often now is seen as a slur of a term of abuse. And Django plays a part even in the demo. I mean, not personally, but he has a fan.
We have been doing a little spot of necromancy behind the scenes.
And I was like, am I going to refer to this as gypsy jazz or jazz manouche is nice, but the people know what it is, or do we want to be careful about what we say? Do we want to be authentic, all the rest of it? And I went and actually did a bit more research and found out nobody used the term at the time.
Have used what term?
Gypsy jazz or jazz manouche. This came later when people were differentiating what Django had been doing. Yeah.
Well, that's very annoying, but also edifying.
He was apparently going sort of bebop by the end of his life, but
what?
Yeah,
nobody would call him.
But
bebop.
Then he died suddenly of a I can't remember, something really dramatic, like
was it not having any fingers?
A brain hemorrhage, and we fell downstairs, and the doctor couldn't get there for a day, and by the time the dog got there, he died.
That's not funny at all.
No.
Django. That's how he's known. My grandpa was super into Django Reinhardt, so all of my early childhood is Django through the walls.
Is this dum, 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 dum,
that's the thing.
Pomp, yeah.
But exactly, if you Google Django Reinhardt, if you've never heard him and you play it, you'll immediately hear why I'm saying Django, because that is always the sort of basic rhythm upon which everything else is hinged, even though it does lots of interesting musical things with it.
If you take one thing away from this podcast, if you don't already know Django Reinhardt's Nuage, French for Clowns,
you will.
It plays a part in the demo, but listen to it. It's not like his usual stuff. It was a sort of anthem of resistance of the Nazis in Paris, because it was swing but not swing as the time, and it's a really nostalgic, beautiful piece. Even if you don't like jazz, give it a listen.
I think that's true of a lot of the songs of the time, because of course the war was the most significant thing that had happened to that entire generation, and so I'm a big fan of old film like Fred and Ginger and the classic kind of jazz standards, and a lot of them these days would be considered sort of nostalgic and fun, but if you actually listen to their lyrics, a lot of them are very poignant, because they're all basically about, let's face the music and dance before we all get shot by the Germans. So there's a lot of profundity there, even though it's a banging good tune.
It's one of the two things that strike you simultaneously when you read about the Second World War and its aftermath. One is how everything continued to be the same as it ever was. People continued to get born, have children.
Well, this is my favourite fact
about
the Second World War.
But also it's so different and so in so many ways. Your favourite thing about the Second World War?
Well, so as a woman, I love true crime. This is a requirement of my sex. And everybody these days has a sort of chapter in their mind about the Second World War. Now, that might be, I had to do it at school and I didn't enjoy it, or there might be I'm fascinated by it, or it might be it's not relevant to me because it's a million years old now, whatever. But, most of us feel like we've got this kind of pocket in our brain where the World War II sits. But, of course, life was going on, just as it always has, while World War II was happening. So one of the most fascinating things I've ever thought about in relation to World War II was some podcast or other I was listening to about a serial killer, a suspected serial killer who was never found, who was active during the Second World War. And of course the Second World War was a time when many people went missing. Often it was because they got killed in the war and that took a while to filter back to family and friends back home. Often it was because records were destroyed by bombs or other activity of war, and often it was because people chose to actually take an opportunity of the kind of chaos of Europe at that time and start a new life in a different country when people weren't that expecting of kind of papers and sense, because everything was mad. And the fact that there was a serial killer who occasionally disappeared people, and there were people who were interviewed, at the time saying, well, I didn't see Rose after a couple of weeks, and I assumed she'd maybe gone off to Italy with her fancy man. But actually, Rose had been murdered in the nearby woods. But everyone just thought, this was the sort of the warp and weft of life was going on, but the sort of boundaries were fuzzier. And I just had never thought about the World War in a way that a serial killer could be happily going about his business at the same time as this historical stuff was happening.
Yeah.
And that maybe makes me sound really stupid, but it's just not the way you're taught to think about this stuff, because you've got these really high level things to understand, like they're Nazis and how Europe responded on a
we have a
governmental
picture
level.
Of it, right? We think about occupied France, and we think about the red swastika on the town hall and the people with grim faces and grey helmets. What we don't think is people still needed their teeth out.
Yeah,
or
and what do
people
they do for their
still would go around
birthdays?
murdering
And,
people.
yeah. And anyway, I hope that we get some of that across in our game. But look, we're nearly at an hour's mark, and I haven't talked about anything I was going to talk about. So should we end it here and fill up the next episode with more toothsome gems about how the World War
I
was
like that of toothsome gems.
Yeah?
It'd be like sort of
smiling like a pirate?
sugar-doodery. Yeah.
We end it on sugar
Toothsome
jewelry.
gems, sugar-doodery.
Thanks for listening.